He believed he was living a perfect marriage until he heard a phrase from a child in his garden. "It's buried here, sir," said the girl, pointing to the ground. Hours later, he would unearth not only a briefcase, but also the truth about the woman he had married. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, William Harrison had crafted the kind of life that graced the pages of Forbes and Architectural Digest. His 30-acre estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, stood as a testament to 2 decades of brilliant investment strategies and unwavering discipline. At 45, Will had achieved what most men only dreamed of: financial independence, respect in the business community, and now, a marriage to a woman who seemed plucked from a fairy tale. "Darling, I've rescheduled the landscapers for next Tuesday," Elizabeth said, gliding into his home office with 2 cups of coffee. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant bun, and even in casual attire, she carried herself with the poise of someone who belonged in his world. "I thought it might interfere with your conference call with the Tokyo investors." Will accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "You think of everything, don't you?" "It's my job to make your life run smoothly," she replied, placing a gentle kiss on his forehead. It had been exactly 8 months since Elizabeth Montgomery had become Elizabeth Harrison, in a lavish ceremony covered by all the right society publications. The wedding had been the social event of the season in Greenwich, with Elizabeth charming every guest from his oldest friends to his most discerning business associates. Will often found himself marveling at how seamlessly she had integrated into his life. His previous relationships had faltered precisely because of his demanding schedule and exacting standards. But Elizabeth seemed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, transformed his beautiful but sterile mansion into a warm home, and most importantly, never complained about his frequent business trips. "I'll be leaving for San Francisco tomorrow," Will said, turning back to the financial reports on his computer screen. "The merger negotiations might keep me there for 3 or 4 days." "I've already packed your suitcase," Elizabeth replied. "Your blue Brioni suit for the main meeting, the grey one for dinners, casual clothes for the weekend if you stay that long. Oh, and I've arranged for a bottle of Macallan 25 to be delivered to Richard Tanner's office. A little pre-negotiation goodwill." Will raised his eyebrows, impressed. Richard Tanner was notoriously difficult to please, and the Scotch was a perfect touch. "How did you know about his preference for Macallan?" Elizabeth's smile was serene. "I pay attention, Will. That's all." As she left the office, Will turned his chair to look out at the expansive grounds of his estate. The manicured lawns, the flowering gardens, the tennis court and the pool house, all of it represented what he had built from nothing. His father had been a factory worker in Pittsburgh, his mother a school teacher. Through scholarships, student loans and sheer determination, he had clawed his way to Harvard Business School and then into the competitive world of investment banking. His first venture capital firm had failed spectacularly when he was 32. His second attempt had yielded his first million by the time he was 35. Now, a decade later, Harrison Capital managed a portfolio worth billions, and Will Harrison's name opened doors throughout the financial world. Yet despite his professional success, something had always been missing. The emptiness of his massive house had begun to haunt him as he approached his mid-40s. Then Elizabeth had appeared at a charity gala, introduced by mutual friends, and within minutes of conversation, Will had felt a connection he couldn't explain. She was 36, divorced, childless, with a background in art history and interior design. Their courtship had been swift but not rushed. 6 months of increasingly intimate dinners, weekends in the Hamptons, and a memorable trip to Tuscany, where he had proposed beneath the stars. Elizabeth had modernized his home's decor, organized his social calendar, and charmed his entire staff. Mrs. Peterson, his housekeeper of 15 years, had initially been wary of the new mistress of the house, but within weeks was singing Elizabeth's praises. Even James, his taciturn chauffeur and security man, had warmed to her efficient, respectful manner. The only person who seemed immune to Elizabeth's charm was Sarah Taylor, the young single mother who worked as his personal assistant. Sarah was competent and loyal, having been with him for 6 years. She lived in the guest cottage at the edge of his property with her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, an arrangement that had begun as temporary when Sarah was going through a difficult divorce, but had become permanent due to its convenience for everyone involved. Sarah maintained a polite but distinctly cool relationship with Elizabeth. Will had noticed the tension, but attributed it to the natural adjustment period in household dynamics. Sarah had been accustomed to handling many aspects of his personal life that Elizabeth now managed. "Mr. Harrison?" Sarah's voice came through the intercom on his desk. "The conference call with Singapore is in 5 minutes. I've uploaded the latest projections to your tablet." "Thank you, Sarah," Will replied, pushing thoughts of domestic politics from his mind and focusing on business. The call went smoothly, as most things in Will's life did these days. By evening, he had finalized his presentation for the San Francisco meetings and was looking forward to a quiet dinner with his wife. Elizabeth had prepared his favorite meal, a perfectly cooked ribeye steak, roasted potatoes with rosemary, and a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2009. As they ate in the formal dining room, surrounded by the antique furniture that had come with the house, Will found himself studying his wife's face in the candlelight. "What is it?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Just wondering how I got so lucky," he replied. Elizabeth's smile was radiant. "I'm the lucky one, Will. Not every woman finds a man who appreciates her." After dinner, they retired to the library where Will enjoyed a glass of bourbon while Elizabeth read beside him on the leather sofa. The comfortable silence between them was one of the things he valued most about their relationship. There was no need to fill every moment with conversation. Later that night, as Elizabeth slept beside him, Will allowed himself a moment of pure contentment. His life had fallen into perfect balance: professional success, a beautiful home, and now a partner who complemented him in every way. Elizabeth was sophisticated without being pretentious, attentive without being clingy, and passionate without being demanding. What Will couldn't see as he drifted off to sleep was the way Elizabeth's eyes opened when she was certain he was asleep. The softness in her gaze hardened as she stared at the ceiling, mentally calculating timelines and bank accounts. Silently, she slipped out of bed and moved to the ensuite bathroom, closing the door before removing a prepaid phone from inside the toilet tank. She typed a brief message: 4 days starting tomorrow. Proceed with phase 2. The reply came seconds later. Understood. Contractors ready. Elizabeth deleted the conversation, returned the phone to its hiding place, and slid back into bed beside her sleeping husband. She placed one arm possessively across his chest, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Everything was going according to plan. William Harrison had built his fortune with intelligence and discipline, but Elizabeth Montgomery had spent her life perfecting a different kind of expertise, one that would soon transfer his wealth into her control. As the moonlight filtered through the curtains of the master bedroom, illuminating the peaceful scene of a married couple, no one could have guessed that beneath the surface of this perfect union lay a deception so calculated that it would soon shatter the very foundation of Will Harrison's carefully constructed world. The Sunday afternoon sunshine bathed the Harrison estate in a golden glow. Will had returned from San Francisco the previous evening, the merger negotiations having concluded successfully a day earlier than expected. Now, with a rare day of leisure ahead of him, he wandered through the gardens, enjoying the sense of peace that his property always provided. "Mr. Will, Mr. Will," a child's voice called out from behind a row of carefully manicured hedges. 6-year-old Lily Taylor came bounding into view, her dark braids bouncing with each step. Unlike many children from her generation, Lily preferred outdoor adventures to digital screens, a quality Will had always admired. "Hello there, Miss Lily," Will greeted her with a warm smile. Despite having no children of his own, Will had developed a genuine fondness for Sarah's daughter over the years. Lily's natural curiosity and unfiltered observations often provided a refreshing contrast to the calculated interactions of his business world. "Mom says I can play outside until lunch," Lily announced, falling into step beside him. "She's doing important work for you." Will nodded. Sarah had offered to come in on Sunday to prepare materials for an investor meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Her dedication was one of the many reasons she had become indispensable to him. "Would you like to help me inspect the gardens?" Will asked, offering his hand to the little girl. Lily nodded enthusiastically, slipping her small hand into his. Together they walked along the stone paths that wound through the extensive grounds, with Lily pointing out interesting insects and asking questions about the various plants they encountered. Their meandering tour took them to the eastern section of the property, where Elizabeth had recently commissioned a redesign of the garden. New flowering beds had been installed, along with a small decorative pond and an imported Italian marble bench. "This area looks different," Will observed, noting that the landscaping appeared even more recent than he had realized. "That's where they were digging," Lily said matter-of-factly, dropping his hand and skipping toward a section near a large oak tree. "Who was digging?" Will asked, following her with mild curiosity. "Mrs. Elizabeth and the men," Lily replied, stopping abruptly at a spot where the mulch appeared freshly spread. She crouched down, her small finger pointing decisively at the ground. "It's buried right here, Mr. Will." Will chuckled, assuming this was the beginning of one of Lily's imaginative games. "Oh? And what's buried there?" "Pirate treasure." Lily looked up at him, her expression unexpectedly serious for a child her age. "No, it's a box. A metal box. They put it in the ground when you were away on your business trip." Something in her tone made Will's smile fade. "What kind of box, Lily?" "A silver one with locks," she replied, using her hands to indicate a rectangular shape about the size of a briefcase. "Mrs. Elizabeth told the men to dig the hole really deep. Then they put the box in and covered it up. She saw me watching from behind the tree and said it was our special secret game. She gave me candy and said I shouldn't tell anyone, especially not you or my mum." Will felt an unexpected chill despite the warm day. "When did this happen, Lily?" 3 days ago, the child answered confidently. "The day after you left for your trip. The men spoke funny, not like us." Before Will could process this information or ask more questions, the sound of approaching footsteps caused them both to turn. Elizabeth was walking briskly toward them, dressed immaculately in white linen pants and a blue silk blouse despite the casual Sunday setting. "There you are," Elizabeth called out, her voice light but her eyes quickly darting between Will and the little girl. "I've been looking all over for you, darling." "Just getting reacquainted with the gardens," Will replied, watching his wife carefully. "Lily has been giving me a tour." Elizabeth's gaze fixed on Lily, and though her smile remained in place, something in her expression hardened. "Sarah is looking for you, sweetheart. I think lunch is ready at your cottage." Lily didn't move, instead pressing herself slightly against Will's leg. The child's sudden reticence was unusual. She had always been comfortable around Elizabeth before. "Lily and I were just discussing the new landscaping," Will said casually, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "She was telling me about some digging that happened while I was away." Elizabeth's laugh sounded forced to Will's ears. "Oh, that! Yes, the landscapers came a day early. I had them plant those new rose bushes near the oak tree. They're a special variety that only blooms at night. I wanted to surprise you." She reached for Lily's hand. "Come along, dear. Your mother will be worried." "I can take her back," Will offered, noting how Lily seemed to shrink from Elizabeth's outstretched hand. "Don't be silly," Elizabeth insisted, her voice taking on an edge Will had rarely heard before. "You just got back from your trip. Relax. I need to speak with Sarah about next week's schedule anyway." Before Will could object, Elizabeth had taken Lily's hand firmly in hers and was leading the child away. Will watched them go, noticing the stiffness in Lily's small shoulders and the unusual urgency in his wife's movements. Standing alone in the garden, Will found himself staring at the spot Lily had indicated. The mulch did look freshly spread, and the plantings seemed hastily arranged compared to the meticulous design of the rest of the gardens. Under normal circumstances, he would have dismissed a child's story about secret buried boxes as imagination. But Lily had always been remarkably straightforward for her age, and Elizabeth's reaction had been strange. Will walked slowly around the oak tree, examining the area from different angles. Nothing appeared obviously disturbed now, but the soil around the new plantings was indeed looser than the surrounding ground. He was being ridiculous, he told himself. There was surely a perfectly reasonable explanation. Perhaps Elizabeth had buried a time capsule or some romantic surprise for their upcoming anniversary. Yet as he made his way back to the main house, the unease lingered. Will had built his fortune by trusting his instincts about people and situations. Something about this scenario felt wrong, and the businessman in him couldn't simply ignore the warning signals. Inside the house, Will found Mrs. Peterson preparing a light lunch in the kitchen. "Have you seen Elizabeth?" he asked casually. "She took the car about 10 minutes ago, Mr. Harrison," the housekeeper replied. "Said she needed to run some errands in town. Would you like me to call her?" "No, that's fine. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson." Will retreated to his study, trying to focus on reviewing documents for tomorrow's meeting, but his mind kept returning to Lily's words and Elizabeth's reaction. After an hour of distracted attempts at work, he set aside his tablet and gazed out the window toward the garden. The rational part of his brain argued that he was overreacting to an innocent situation. The part that had survived and thrived in the cutthroat world of high finance suggested otherwise. Finally, he picked up his phone and called Sarah's extension at the guest cottage. "Sarah, sorry to disturb your Sunday. Is Lily with you?" "Yes, Mr. Harrison. We just finished lunch. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I just wanted to invite you both for dinner tonight. Elizabeth is out running errands, and I thought it would be nice to have some company." There was a slight pause before Sarah responded. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Harrison. What time would you like us to come up to the main house?" "Let's say 6 o'clock. And Sarah, I'd like to speak with you privately at some point this evening. Nothing urgent, just a matter I'd like your perspective on." Another pause, longer this time. "Of course, Mr. Harrison." After ending the call, Will sat motionless in his leather chair, contemplating his next move. His marriage to Elizabeth had been a whirlwind romance by his usually methodical standards. He had been captivated by her charm, intelligence, and the way she seemed to understand him so completely. Had he missed something important in his eagerness to fill the emptiness in his life? Will stood up suddenly, decision made. He would not wait for Elizabeth to return. If there was indeed something buried in his garden, he needed to know what it was. He changed into casual clothes and work boots, then made his way to the groundskeeper's shed where various gardening tools were kept. Selecting a shovel and a pair of gloves, Will returned to the spot Lily had indicated. He felt foolish, a successful businessman digging in his own garden based on a child's story. Yet he couldn't shake the conviction that something significant was hidden beneath the freshly planted roses. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Will Harrison plunged the shovel into the soft earth, determined to uncover whatever truth lay buried in his perfect world. With each scoop of soil, he felt his certainty grow. Something was wrong in the paradise he had built, and for the first time since meeting Elizabeth, doubt crept into his heart like an unwelcome shadow. The shovel struck something solid about 2 feet down. Will dropped to his knees, setting the tool aside and using his gloved hands to clear away the remaining soil. His heart pounded as his fingers made contact with a cool metal surface. Lily had been telling the truth. There was indeed a box buried in his garden, a sleek aluminum case with a combination lock, hidden intentionally beneath the new plantings. Will extracted the case from its earthen hiding place, brushing off the clinging soil. It was heavier than he expected and locked securely. He placed it on the ground beside the hole, staring at it as though it might suddenly spring open and reveal its secrets. Whatever was inside, Elizabeth had gone to considerable lengths to conceal it from him. As the implications of this discovery began to settle in his mind, Will heard the distant sound of a car coming up the long driveway. Elizabeth was returning. He quickly refilled the hole as best he could, rearranged the disturbed plants and concealed the case inside his jacket. By the time he had returned the gardening tools to the shed and made his way back to the house, Elizabeth's car was pulling into the garage. Will Harrison, who had built an empire on calculated risks and careful analysis, now faced the most uncertain moment of his life. The metal case he had hidden in his private study safe might contain something innocuous, or it might shatter the foundation of everything he believed about the woman he had married. Either way, by nightfall, he would know the truth. Will managed to appear composed when Elizabeth entered the house, though his mind raced with questions. She greeted him with her usual warm smile and a light kiss, seemingly unaware of his discovery. "The errands took longer than expected," she explained, setting her designer handbag on the entryway table. "Traffic in town was terrible. Did you have a good afternoon?" "Productive," Will replied, studying her face for any sign of concern or suspicion. "I invited Sarah and Lily for dinner tonight. Thought it would be nice to have some company." Elizabeth's smile faltered momentarily before reappearing with perfect poise. "That's lovely, darling. But I wish you'd consulted me first. I'd planned a quiet evening for just the two of us. I picked up that aged ribeye you love from Caldwell's butcher. We can save it for tomorrow," Will said, watching her reaction carefully. "Sarah's been working all weekend on the Westlake presentation. It's the least we can do." "Of course," Elizabeth conceded gracefully. "What time are they coming?" 6 o'clock. Elizabeth glanced at her watch. "That's in less than 2 hours. I should change and start dinner preparations." She moved toward the staircase, then paused. "Will, is everything all right? You seem distracted." Will forced a reassuring smile. "Just thinking about tomorrow's meeting. Everything's fine." She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and continued upstairs. Will waited until he heard the bedroom door close before retreating to his study, locking the door behind him. The metal case sat on his desk where he had left it, still covered with traces of garden soil. Will stared at it, both dreading and needing to know its contents. The combination lock presented a challenge. He had no idea what numbers might open it. After a moment's consideration, he reached for his phone and called a number rarely used. "James," he said when his security specialist answered, "I need your assistance in my study. Discreetly, please." James Donovan had been with Will for nearly a decade, hired initially as a driver but valued for his background in military intelligence and security. Within minutes, the tall, taciturn man knocked softly on the study door. "You needed me, sir?" James asked, his expression neutral as he entered and saw the case on the desk. "I need this opened," Will said simply, "preferably without damaging the contents." If James was curious about the origin of the locked case, or why his employer couldn't open it himself, he didn't show it. He merely nodded, set down a small bag he'd brought with him, and extracted several specialized tools. "May take a few minutes, sir," he said, examining the lock mechanism. "This is a high-end case. Not something you'd buy at a typical luggage store." Will watched in silence as James worked methodically on the lock, trying various techniques before finally producing a satisfied grunt. "Got it," he announced, stepping back from the desk. "Thank you, James," Will said, moving to take his place in front of the case. "That will be all for now." James hesitated. "Sir, if I may, whatever's in there you might want backup when you open it." Will considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "I appreciate the concern, but this is something I need to handle personally." After James departed, Will stood motionless before the unlocked case, his hand resting on the cool metal surface. Whatever lay inside would change something. He just didn't know how profoundly. Taking a deep breath, he lifted the lid. The first item he saw was a passport, not unusual for someone of Elizabeth's social standing. But as he lifted it, he realized it wasn't her American passport that they'd used on their trips abroad. This one was British, and when he opened it, Elizabeth's photograph stared back at him, but the name printed beside it was Catherine Blackwell. Beneath this passport lay several more, Australian, Canadian, French, each bearing Elizabeth's image but different names. There were driver's licenses, birth certificates, social security cards, all professionally created and seemingly authentic, all featuring his wife's face paired with various identities. The case also contained several phones, financial documents detailing offshore accounts, and what appeared to be research files on several men, wealthy men from different countries. With growing horror, Will found a thick folder labeled Harrison W. inside, were detailed notes on his businesses, properties, banking information, and personal habits, the kind of comprehensive profile an intelligence agency might compile on a target. Most disturbing of all was a series of photographs showing Elizabeth, or whatever her real name was, with different men in intimate settings. In each photo she looked different, brunette in some, red-headed in others, always styled to present a distinct persona. On the back of each photo was a name and a figure, a dollar amount. Will recognized some of the men from financial circles. One had famously lost his fortune in a divorce scandal 2 years ago. His hands trembling slightly, Will found legal documents detailing the formation of several construction and renovation companies, the same companies Elizabeth had insisted on using for the recent updates to their home. Further investigation revealed these businesses were shells, with funds being diverted to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The final item in the case was a sleek tablet. When Will powered it on, it requested a password. After 3 attempts using combinations of their anniversary date and Elizabeth's birthday, he set it aside, unwilling to risk triggering any security measures that might erase its contents. Will sank into his chair. The evidence of his wife's deception spread across his desk. Elizabeth, if that was even her real name, was not the woman he had married. She was some kind of professional con artist, and he was apparently her latest target. The renovation projects she had insisted on, the financial discussions she had gradually inserted herself into, her occasional suggestions about restructuring some of his holdings for tax purposes. It had all been groundwork for something larger. The sound of the dinner timer from the kitchen jolted him back to the present. Sarah and Lily would arrive soon, and Elizabeth was downstairs preparing a meal as though this were just another evening in their perfect life. Will needed time to process what he'd discovered and determine his next steps, but he couldn't confront Elizabeth yet, not without understanding the full scope of her operation. Carefully he repacked the case, keeping only the file with his name and the collection of identity documents. These he locked in his personal safe, behind a painting on the wall. The case itself, he returned to its original locked state with James's tools and placed in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of his study, a security feature installed years ago that even Elizabeth didn't know about. After washing his hands and composing himself as best he could, Will descended to the main floor. He would need to play a role tonight, the unsuspecting husband, while processing the devastating truth that his marriage was an elaborate fraud. Elizabeth was in the kitchen, elegantly dressed despite the domestic setting, arranging a charcuterie board with the practiced eye of a seasoned hostess. "Can I help with anything?" Will asked, keeping his voice casual despite the turmoil within. "Everything's under control," Elizabeth replied, flashing him that perfect smile that had once made his heart race, but now sent a chill down his spine. "I've prepared salmon for dinner. Sarah mentioned once that Lily loves fish." The doorbell rang, and Will excused himself to answer it, grateful for the momentary escape from Elizabeth's presence. Sarah stood on the doorstep, professional as always in simple black pants and a burgundy sweater. Lily bounced beside her, having changed into what was clearly her special occasion dress. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Harrison," Sarah said as they entered. "Mr. Will," Lily exclaimed with the excitement only a child could muster for a dinner invitation. "I brought my drawing to show you." "I can't wait to see it," Will replied with genuine warmth, leading them to the living room where Elizabeth was now serving drinks. Throughout dinner, Will maintained his facade of normalcy while observing his wife with new eyes. Every gesture, every laugh, every thoughtful comment about his upcoming business meeting now seemed calculated. He noticed how she subtly directed the conversation, gathering information while appearing to merely make pleasant dinner conversation. "Sarah, Will mentioned you've been working on the Westlake presentation all weekend," Elizabeth said, as they enjoyed dessert. "That's so dedicated of you. Is that the commercial property development in Boston?" "No, that's Westfield," Sarah corrected politely. "Westlake is the technology acquisition in Seattle." "Of course," Elizabeth laughed lightly. "I get all Will's projects confused sometimes. The Seattle deal must be significant." "What's the projected investment again?" Will interjected before Sarah could answer, suddenly aware of how Elizabeth was fishing for specific financial details. "It's still in the preliminary stages. Nothing worth discussing over cheesecake." After dinner, while Elizabeth cleared the plates with Sarah's help, Will found himself alone with Lily in the living room. The little girl climbed onto the sofa beside him, proudly displaying her drawing, a colorful rendition of the Harrison estate, with stick figures representing its inhabitants. "This is you," Lily explained, pointing to a tall figure near what appeared to be the garden. "And this is me, and this is Mommy near our cottage." "It's wonderful," Will said, genuinely impressed by her attention to detail despite her young age. "Where's Mrs. Elizabeth in your picture?" Lily's smile faded. She glanced toward the kitchen doorway, then leaned closer to Will, lowering her voice. "I didn't draw her. She was mean today." "Mean?" Will kept his tone light, though his interest was intense. "How so?" "After she took me from the garden, she squeezed my arm really tight," Lily whispered, rubbing her upper arm at the memory. "She said I was a bad girl for telling you about the secret box. She said if I told you anything else, I couldn't live in the cottage with Mommy anymore." Will felt a surge of anger at the thought of Elizabeth threatening this child. "Lily, you're not a bad girl. You did the right thing telling me about what you saw." "There were papers in the box," Lily continued, her voice barely audible. "I saw them when they put it in the hole. And pictures, too." Before Will could ask more questions, Elizabeth and Sarah returned from the kitchen. Elizabeth's gaze immediately focused on Will's close conversation with Lily, and something predatory flashed in her eyes before her pleasant mask returned. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked, her tone light but her posture tense. "Lily was just showing me her artwork," Will replied, holding up the drawing. "She's quite talented." As the evening concluded and Sarah prepared to take Lily home, Will realized he hadn't had the private conversation with Sarah that he'd mentioned on the phone. With Elizabeth hovering nearby, creating such an opportunity now seemed impossible. "Sarah," he said as they walked toward the door, "I'll need you in my study at 7 tomorrow to finalize the Westlake presentation before the investors arrive." Sarah nodded, understanding from his tone that this was the private meeting he had requested earlier. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. 7 o'clock. After they left, Elizabeth looped her arm through Will's as they returned to the living room. "They're lovely," she said, "though I think Sarah doesn't quite approve of me. She's very protective of you, isn't she? She's been with me a long time, Will replied neutrally. She's protective of Harrison Capital's interests. Elizabeth murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. Speaking of interests, I've been meaning to discuss that property in the Berkshires you mentioned last month. I think it would make a wonderful weekend retreat, and my friend Charlotte knows the real estate market there intimately. She could help us negotiate a good price. Will recognized the subtle probing for what it was now, another attempt to position herself near his assets. It's not a priority at the moment, he said. The Westlake deal is taking all my attention. Later that night, as Elizabeth slept beside him, Will lay awake, his mind racing. The woman he had married was a stranger, a professional predator who had targeted him for his wealth. The depth of the deception was staggering, and he had fallen for it completely. Now he needed to extricate himself from her web, without alerting her to his discovery. Tomorrow he would speak with Sarah, the one person in his household he now trusted implicitly. Then he would contact Michael Bennett, his attorney, to begin gathering the resources he would need. Whatever Elizabeth was planning, Will was determined that she would not succeed. The game had changed, and she didn't know that he was now playing too. Precisely at 7 the next morning, Sarah Taylor knocked on the door of Will's study. He had been awake since 5, having slept fitfully beside the woman he now knew was an imposter. Elizabeth had still been sleeping when he slipped out of bed, her face peaceful in repose, giving no hint of the deception she was orchestrating. "Come in, Sarah," Will called, rising from behind his desk. "Please close the door." Sarah entered, professional as always with her tablet in hand, ready for what she assumed would be a review of the day's presentation. She paused when she saw Will's expression. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" Will gestured for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Instead of sitting across from her, he took the adjacent chair, eliminating the barrier between them. "Sarah, what I'm about to discuss with you is extremely sensitive. Before I begin, I need to know that I can trust you completely." Sarah's posture straightened. "Mr. Harrison, I've been your personal assistant for 6 years. I would never betray your confidence." Will nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. "I've discovered something disturbing about Elizabeth." He hesitated, then decided directness was necessary. "She's not who she claims to be." Sarah's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, Will noted, but rather confirmation of a suspicion. "You've had concerns about her," Will stated, recognizing the look. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't feel it was my place to say anything. She's your wife, and you seemed happy." "What did you notice?" Will pressed. "Small inconsistencies," Sarah admitted. "References to a childhood in Connecticut, then later mentions of growing up in California. Details about her education that didn't align with what she'd said previously. Nothing concrete enough to raise an alarm, just patterns that didn't quite fit." Will opened his desk drawer and removed the file he had taken from the metal case. "Yesterday, based on something Lily told me, I discovered this buried in the garden." He explained about the case and showed her some of the multiple identities Elizabeth had used. Sarah's professional composure finally cracked as she examined the documents. "My God," she whispered. "Who is she really?" "I don't know yet," Will replied, "but I intend to find out. I need your help, Sarah. I can't let Elizabeth know that I'm aware of her deception while I investigate further." "Of course," Sarah agreed immediately. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need absolute discretion. No one can know about this. Not Mrs. Peterson, not James, no one. Second, I'm going to have Michael Bennett come to the house today, under the pretense of discussing the Westlake deal. I need you to schedule that meeting and ensure Elizabeth doesn't find it suspicious." Sarah was already making notes. "I'll arrange it as part of the pre-meeting preparations. Mr. Bennett often reviews contracts before investor presentations." "Good. Finally, and this is perhaps most important, I need you to keep Lily close to you at all times." Will's expression darkened. "She told me that Elizabeth threatened her yesterday after she mentioned the buried case to me." Sarah's head snapped up, maternal protectiveness flashing in her eyes. "Threatened my daughter? How?" "Implied that you both might lose your home in the cottage if Lily continued to talk about what she saw." Will's voice was grim. "I won't allow her to intimidate a child, Sarah. But I need time to build a case and understand exactly what we're dealing with. Elizabeth is clearly part of something larger. The case contained evidence of other victims and references to accomplices." Sarah took a deep breath, visibly controlling her anger. Lily will stay with me at all times. I'll tell Mrs. Patterson that she's feeling under the weather, so she'll be in my office today instead of playing in the gardens as usual. Thank you. Will hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. The renovation companies Elizabeth insisted on using for the recent updates to the house appear to be shell corporations. I believe she's been siphoning money through fraudulent billing. Sarah's expression changed to one of dawning comprehension. The invoices, she murmured. What invoices? Last month, when I was organizing the household expense files, I noticed the renovation costs seemed unusually high compared to market rates. When I mentioned it to Elizabeth, she said you had specifically requested premium materials that drove up the cost. She took over managing those files after that. Will's jaw tightened. Elizabeth had been methodically removing Sarah from any position where she might notice financial discrepancies. From now on, I want you to review all household expenditures again. Create a second set of books if necessary, but don't let Elizabeth know you're tracking anything. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the study door. Will quickly gathered the documents and returned them to his drawer before calling, "Come in." Elizabeth entered, already dressed impeccably in a navy business suit that complemented Will's usual attire. Her smile was warm as she greeted them both, though her eyes lingered on their close seating arrangement with a hint of curiosity. "Good morning. I thought I'd bring you both some coffee before the day gets hectic." She placed a tray with 3 cups on the desk. "The investors arrive at 10, correct?" "That's right," Will confirmed, accepting the coffee with a smile that he hoped appeared genuine. "Sarah was just reviewing the final presentation points with me. Don't let me interrupt," Elizabeth said, taking the 3rd coffee cup for herself and perching on the edge of Will's desk. "I know how important the Westlake acquisition is." She turned to Sarah. "Will Lily be joining you today? She's such a delight to have around." The casual inquiry might have seemed innocent yesterday, but now Will recognized it as surveillance, Elizabeth checking on the child who knew too much. "She's feeling a bit under the weather," Sarah replied smoothly. "Nothing serious, just a slight fever. She'll be resting in my office today." "Poor thing," Elizabeth said, her expression appropriately concerned. "I have some errands in town this morning, but I could look in on her later if you'd like." "That's very kind," Sarah responded, her tone professional but cool. "But I think what she needs most is rest without disturbance." Elizabeth nodded, then turned her attention back to Will. "I should let you get back to work. Oh, and Michael Bennett's office called while you were in the shower. Something about needing to review the Westlake contracts. I told them you'd call back." Will exchanged a quick glance with Sarah. They hadn't yet arranged the meeting with Michael, which meant Elizabeth was monitoring his attorney's communications with him. "Thank you," Will said, revealing nothing in his expression. "I'll handle it." After Elizabeth left, closing the door behind her, Will and Sarah remained silent for several moments, ensuring she wasn't lingering outside. "She's watching everything," Sarah finally whispered. "Yes," Will agreed, "and we need to be extremely careful. Call Michael from your cell phone, not the house line. Tell him I need to see him urgently, but to approach this as routine legal business." Sarah nodded and stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Mr. Harrison, be careful. If she's gone to these lengths already, there's no telling what she might do if she feels threatened." After Sarah departed, Will sat alone in his study, contemplating his next moves. He needed more information about Elizabeth's true identity and her larger operation. The tablet from the case might hold crucial details, but without the password, it remained inaccessible. Will opened his laptop and began his own investigation, searching for information on the names from Elizabeth's various passports. He found nothing substantial. Each identity had a minimal digital footprint, suggesting they were created recently and with great care. Next, he researched the men in the photographs, discovering that several had experienced significant financial losses in the past 5 years, often following marriages or relationships with women whose descriptions varied, but whose methods sounded alarmingly familiar. By 9 o'clock, Will had composed himself for the investor meeting. He went through the motions of his normal routine, reviewing the presentation with his team, greeting the investors when they arrived, and delivering a compelling case for the Westlake acquisition. Throughout it all, he maintained his facade of normalcy, even as he caught Elizabeth charming the investors during the lunch break, deftly extracting information about their portfolios while appearing to engage in mere pleasant conversation. Michael Bennett arrived at 2 o'clock after the investors had departed. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and the measured demeanor that came from 30 years of legal practice, Michael had been Will's attorney since his first successful venture. More importantly, he was one of the few people Will trusted without reservation. "Sarah mentioned there's some urgency to our meeting," Michael said once they were alone in Will's study, the door firmly closed. Will didn't waste time with preliminaries. "I need your absolute discretion on this, Michael." He retrieved the file from his drawer and spread the contents across his desk. "My wife is not who she claims to be." Michael listened without interruption as Will explained his discovery and showed him the evidence. When Will finished, the attorney leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "This is extraordinary," Michael said finally, "and deeply concerning. If I'm understanding correctly, you believe Elizabeth is part of a larger operation targeting wealthy individuals for financial fraud." "Yes," Will confirmed, "and she's been methodically positioning herself to access my accounts and assets. The renovation companies are just the beginning. She's been asking increasingly specific questions about my investments, suggesting new financial managers, even recommending changes to my will." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "We need to approach this carefully. If she realizes you're onto her, she might accelerate whatever plan she has in motion, or simply disappear with whatever she's already managed to divert. What do you recommend?" "First, we secure your assets. I'll have my team conduct a forensic audit of all your accounts and business holdings to identify any unauthorized activities or vulnerable points. We'll do this quietly, through channels Elizabeth won't be monitoring. And then, we gather evidence," Michael continued. "I know a former FBI investigator who specializes in identity fraud and financial crimes. He works privately now, with absolute discretion. With your permission, I'll bring him in to build a comprehensive case." "Do it," Will authorized. "Whatever resources are needed." "In the meantime," Michael advised, "maintain normalcy. Don't change your routines or behavior in ways that might alert her. And Will," he hesitated, "consider the possibility that there are other accomplices beyond those mentioned in the files. Be careful who you trust." After Michael left, Will sat at his desk, staring at the photographs of Elizabeth with her previous targets. How many lives had she destroyed with her elaborate deceptions? And what would she do when cornered? The door to his study opened, and Elizabeth entered without knocking, a liberty she often took as his wife. "How did the meeting go?" "The investors seemed impressed during lunch." "Very well," Will replied, having already tucked away the incriminating documents. "Michael thinks we'll have the contracts finalized by the end of the week." "Wonderful!" Elizabeth perched on the corner of his desk, a position that once would have invited him to pull her into his lap. Now it took all his self-control not to recoil from her touch when she ran her fingers through his hair. "We should celebrate. I was thinking we might drive up to that vineyard in the Hudson Valley this weekend, just the two of us." Will recognized the suggestion for what it was, an attempt to isolate him from his staff and familiar surroundings. "That sounds nice, but let's wait until after the Westlake deal closes. I'll need to be available for any last-minute negotiations." A flicker of frustration crossed Elizabeth's face before her smile returned. "Of course, darling. Your work always comes first. That's one of the things I admire about you, your dedication." As she leaned down to kiss him, Will forced himself to respond as the loving husband he had been just 24 hours ago. Her lips felt foreign against his now, the intimacy a calculated move, in a game whose rules he was only beginning to understand. "I have some calls to make," he said, gently creating distance between them. "Investors waiting for updates." Elizabeth nodded and straightened up. "I'll let you work. Don't forget we have the charity gala at the Anderson Foundation tonight." After she left, Will exhaled slowly, the strain of maintaining his performance taking its toll. The charity gala would be another test of his ability to play along with Elizabeth's charade while working to uncover her true agenda. Every hour that passed brought new revelations about the extent of her deception, and Will couldn't help wondering what else lay buried beneath the perfect surface of the life they had supposedly built together. The Anderson Foundation Gala was in full swing. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel transformed into a glittering showcase of New York's elite. Will moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, maintaining the facade of the successful businessman and devoted husband. Elizabeth remained by his side, radiant in a deep emerald gown that drew admiring glances from across the room. William Harrison, Thomas Aldridge, a fellow venture capitalist, approached with a champagne flute raised in greeting. Heard about the Westlake deal. Quite the coup. News travels fast, Will replied with a practiced smile. Nothing signed yet, Tom. But it will be, Thomas winked, then turned his attention to Elizabeth. Mrs. Harrison, you're looking absolutely stunning this evening. You're too kind, Thomas, Elizabeth responded, her voice carrying just the right blend of modesty and confidence. Although I can't take credit for this dress, Will has impeccable taste. Will felt a chill at how easily the lies fell from her lips. He had never seen the dress before tonight. You two make quite the power couple, Thomas observed. Hard to believe you've been married less than a year. You seem like you've been together forever. When you know, Elizabeth said, slipping her arm through Will's and leaning into him affectionately. Isn't that right, darling? Indeed, Will agreed, his expression revealing nothing of the revulsion he felt at her touch. If you'll excuse us, Tom, I see Michael Bennett over there. Business never sleeps, I'm afraid. As they moved across the ballroom, Elizabeth maintained her perfect smile, but her grip on his arm tightened slightly. You seem tense tonight, she observed. Is something wrong? Just the usual pre-contract jitters, Will lied smoothly. The Westlake acquisition is complex. Elizabeth studied his face for a moment, her eyes calculating behind their warm exterior. You know what you need? A vacation. Once this deal closes, we should go somewhere truly relaxing. I was thinking Thailand, perhaps, or the Maldives, completely off the grid. Another attempt to isolate him, Will noted. Perhaps, he replied noncommittally, though I doubt Harrison Capital would survive long without cellular service. The company existed before you, and will exist after you, Elizabeth said lightly, though the words carried an unsettling weight. No one is irreplaceable, darling. Before Will could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sophia Chen, a prominent philanthropist whose technology foundation was the evening's primary beneficiary. Elizabeth! Will! So glad you could make it, Sophia exclaimed, embracing Elizabeth warmly. Elizabeth, I can't thank you enough for your help with the auction items. The rare book collection you secured from the Astor estate is expected to bring in over 100,000 for our STEM education initiative. Happy to help, Elizabeth replied. Will and I believe strongly in your mission. Will maintained his pleasant expression, though this was the first he'd heard of any rare book collection from the Astor estate. What else had Elizabeth been doing in his name? As the evening progressed, Will excused himself to use the restroom, taking the opportunity to check his phone. There was a message from Michael, investigator on board. Beginning background work tomorrow. Call me in the morning. When Will returned to the ballroom, he couldn't immediately locate Elizabeth. He scanned the crowd, finally spotting her in deep conversation with Richard Kensington, an elderly banking magnate known for his extensive art collection and recent widowhood. The predatory focus in Elizabeth's eyes was unmistakable now that Will knew what to look for. She was prospecting, identifying her next potential target should her current operation fail. Your wife is quite charming, remarked a voice beside him. Will turned to find Patricia Anderson, the Foundation's elderly matriarch, watching Elizabeth with shrewd eyes. She has a gift for making people feel special, particularly wealthy, vulnerable people. The comment was too pointed to be coincidental. Will studied Patricia's face, noting the intelligent assessment in her gaze. You sound suspicious, Patricia. Let's just say I've been around long enough to recognize patterns, the older woman replied. 3 years ago, at this very gala, I met a fascinating woman named Victoria Lawson, striking brunette, expert in Renaissance art, captivating personality. Patricia sipped her champagne. 6 months later, she married Charles Whitmore. A year after that, he lost $60 million in what was described as a sophisticated investment fraud. Victoria disappeared shortly thereafter. Will felt his pulse quicken. And you think... I think your wife bears a remarkable resemblance to Victoria, despite the different hair color and name. Patricia's voice remained casual, as though discussing the weather. Just as she resembles Emma Patterson, who briefly captivated the Toronto art scene before her whirlwind marriage to Canadian industrialist Robert Mackenzie ended in financial disaster. Will struggled to maintain his composure. Why are you telling me this? Because contrary to what some might think, I don't enjoy watching vultures circle their prey, Patricia replied. Charles was a friend. So is Robert. And while we've had our competitive moments over the years, William, I've always respected you. She placed her empty glass on a passing waiter's tray. Consider this a courtesy between colleagues. I suggest you verify your accounts and update your security measures. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should mingle with the other guests. As Patricia glided away, Will remained rooted to the spot, processing this new information. If Patricia Anderson had recognized Elizabeth, others might as well. The circle was tightening, not just around Elizabeth but around Will himself. When they finally returned home after the gala, Will pleaded exhaustion and retired to one of the guest bedrooms, claiming he didn't want to disturb Elizabeth with his restless sleep before her charity meeting the next morning. Alone in the quiet room, he called Sarah despite the late hour. "Is everything okay?" Sarah answered immediately, her voice alert despite being woken from sleep. "Everything's fine," Will assured her, "but I need you to do something first thing tomorrow. Contact Patricia Anderson's office and request a private meeting with her. Make it seem related to a potential donation to her foundation." "Of course. May I ask why?" "She recognized Elizabeth tonight," Will explained. "Identified her as having used at least 2 other identities in similar situations with wealthy men. Patricia might have information that could help us understand what we're dealing with." After ending the call, Will lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, his mind racing. Elizabeth was clearly part of a sophisticated operation, one that had successfully targeted multiple high-net-worth individuals across different countries. The scope suggested resources, planning, and connections far beyond what he had initially imagined. Morning arrived with the ping of a text message from Sarah. "Meeting with Mrs. Anderson arranged for 11 a.m. at her office. Mrs. H believes you're in strategy meetings at Harrison Capital all day." Will dressed quickly and slipped out of the house before Elizabeth awoke, leaving a note about early meetings. James drove him into the city in silence, dropping him at the Harrison Capital offices, where he spent an hour maintaining appearances before taking a private car to Patricia Anderson's foundation headquarters. The Anderson Foundation occupied the top floor of a sleek midtown building. Patricia received Will in her corner office, a space that reflected its owner, elegant, understated, and commanding impressive views of the city. "I suspected I might hear from you," Patricia said, dispensing with pleasantries. "You're not the first, you know." "Not the first to what?" "To discover the truth about your wife mid-con." Patricia opened a drawer in her desk and removed a slim file. "Charles Whitmore came to me after finding photographs and passports in Victoria's private safe. Unfortunately, by then, she had already transferred significant assets to untraceable accounts." Will accepted the file, opening it to find comprehensive dossiers on multiple iterations of the woman he knew as Elizabeth. Different names, different looks, but always the same modus operandi. "How did you compile this?" Will asked, scanning the detailed information. "After Charles was affected, I hired private investigators," Patricia explained. "I've spent 50 years building relationships in the financial world, William. When someone preys on members of my circle, I take it personally. Over time, I identified a pattern of similar cases spanning at least 15 years and 3 continents. And you believe all these women are the same person?" "My wife." "Not all," Patricia clarified. "Some are clearly different individuals, but with identical methods. Your wife appears to be one of the more prolific operators, but she's part of something larger. A network of some kind that targets wealthy individuals through romantic entanglements." Will nodded grimly. "The case I found contained references to accomplices and multiple operations. They're sophisticated and patient," Patricia continued. "They research their targets extensively, create identities tailored to appeal to specific vulnerabilities, and build trust over months before beginning to extract assets. By the time most victims realize what's happening, they've lost millions and the perpetrators have vanished. Why haven't they been caught? Surely with this pattern—" "Pride," Patricia interrupted. "Most victims refuse to admit they've been duped. They accept financial losses rather than endure public humiliation. Those who do pursue legal action find themselves chasing ghosts, false identities, offshore accounts, jurisdictional complications. And these people are careful to operate just below thresholds that would trigger federal investigations." Will absorbed this information, aligning it with what he had already discovered. "I need to know who she really is, Patricia. Not just the aliases, but her actual identity, her origins. There must be a real person beneath all these fabrications." Patricia's expression turned sympathetic. "That's the question Charles asked too. And Robert. The painful truth, William, is that after years of investigation, we still don't know. Still don't. Whoever these people really are, they've buried their true identities very, very deep. After leaving Patricia's office, Will met with Michael Bennett and the private investigator he had engaged, a former FBI agent named David Mercer, who specialized in identity fraud and financial crimes. In a secure conference room at Michael's law firm, Will shared what he had learned from Patricia Anderson. "This aligns with my preliminary findings," Mercer confirmed, his manner direct and efficient. "Based on the documents you provided and my initial research, your wife is part of a sophisticated network that's been operating internationally for at least a decade. They target high-net-worth individuals, primarily men, using romantic relationships as their entry point." "Can you identify who she really is?" Will asked. Mercer's expression was not encouraging. "That will be challenging. These operators are exceptionally careful about protecting their true identities. However, we can follow the money. Financial transactions leave traces, even when routed through multiple shells and offshore accounts." "What's the next step?" Will asked. "I need access to all your financial records, personal and business," Mercer replied. "I also need to examine the electronic devices in your home, particularly any used by your wife. And the tablet you mentioned from the case could be crucial." "The tablet is locked and I don't have the password," Will reminded him. "I have specialized tools for that," Mercer assured him. "But I'll need physical access to both the tablet and your wife's devices when she's not present." "She has a charity luncheon tomorrow," Will said. "She'll be gone for at least 3 hours." "That should be sufficient," Mercer nodded. "I'll come to your home disguised as an IT consultant doing routine maintenance on your home network." As they finalized the details of Mercer's visit, Will couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. While he had been investigating Elizabeth, she had undoubtedly been advancing her own agenda. The longer this continued, the greater the risk, not just to his assets but potentially to his safety and that of Sarah and Lily. When Will returned home that evening, Elizabeth greeted him with a gourmet dinner and affectionate attention. She asked detailed questions about his day, each seemingly innocent but designed to verify his whereabouts and activities. Will matched her performance with his own, describing fictional meetings and business developments with just enough specificity to sound convincing. "I've been thinking about the Berkshire's property again," Elizabeth mentioned casually over dessert. "I took the liberty of having my friend Charlotte send over some listings. There's one that's particularly promising, very private, with its own helipad for easy commuting to the city." Will recognized the strategy. A remote property with private transportation would further isolate him from his support network while providing her with a quick escape route if necessary. "Let's review them this weekend," he suggested, buying time. "After the Westlake contracts are signed." Elizabeth smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, always business first." She reached across the table to take his hand. "I hope you know how proud I am of your success, Will. Everything you've built, it's truly remarkable." In that moment, watching her perfect performance, Will understood the true danger he faced. Elizabeth, whatever her real name might be, wasn't just after his money. She was a consummate actress who had studied him, identified his vulnerabilities, and constructed an elaborate persona designed specifically to exploit them. For 8 months, he had opened his life, his home and his heart to someone who viewed him not as a husband, but as a target. Tomorrow Mercer would search for electronic evidence while Elizabeth was out. Until then, Will would continue his own performance, pretending to be the unsuspecting husband while gathering the information he needed to dismantle her operation and protect himself from whatever endgame she had planned. "To success," Will said, raising his wineglass in a toast, his eyes never leaving hers. "And to the future." Elizabeth's smile widened as she clinked her glass against his. "Yes, darling, to our very bright future together." Beneath the dining table, Will's free hand tightened into a fist. The game was becoming increasingly dangerous, and he couldn't afford to lose. The following day unfolded according to plan. Elizabeth departed for her charity luncheon at 11, dressed impeccably in a cream Chanel suit that Will knew had cost more than what many of his employees earned in a month. He wondered now where the money for her extensive wardrobe had actually come from. His accounts, certainly, but through which hidden channels? "I might go shopping afterward," Elizabeth announced as she kissed him goodbye at the door. "Don't wait up if your meetings run late." "Enjoy your afternoon," Will replied with a convincing smile. "You deserve some time to yourself after all your hard work on the foundation event." 30 minutes after Elizabeth's departure, David Mercer arrived in a van marked Greenwich Network Solutions. His disguise as an IT specialist was convincing, khaki pants, polo shirt with an embroidered logo, and a tool belt containing various electronic devices. Sarah met him at the door and escorted him to Will's study, where Will waited with the locked tablet from the case. "We have approximately 2.5 hours, Will informed Mercer, handing over the tablet. "Possibly 3 if she goes shopping as mentioned, but we shouldn't count on it." Mercer nodded and immediately went to work, connecting the tablet to specialized equipment he had brought with him. "This will take some time," he explained. "Meanwhile, I'll need access to your wife's primary computer and phone if possible." "Her laptop is in her study across the hall," Will said. "But she takes her phone everywhere with her. The laptop will be sufficient for now. Does she have cloud storage accounts that you know of?" "Nothing I'm aware of specifically, though I've seen her using various applications." Mercer moved efficiently between rooms, establishing connections to Elizabeth's laptop, while his equipment worked on breaking the tablet's encryption. Within an hour, he had created clones of her hard drive and was systematically bypassing security on her various accounts. "She's careful," Mercer observed, as they reconvened in Will's study. "Uses different passwords for different services, two-factor authentication on sensitive accounts. But she's made one critical mistake." "What's that?" Will asked. "She's using a password manager with a master password." Mercer's expression was grim satisfaction, "and she's written a hint for that master password in a document disguised as a shopping list. The hint references grandmother's birthday plus First Street. Cross-referencing with the background identities in her files, I've narrowed it down to 3 possible combinations." As they spoke, the equipment connected to the tablet emitted a soft beep. "We're in," Mercer announced, disconnecting the tablet from his devices. "Let's see what we have." The contents of the tablet proved to be even more damning than Will had anticipated. It contained detailed files on multiple targets, wealthy men across North America and Europe, with comprehensive profiles including personal habits, financial information, family connections, and psychological assessments. Will's own file was the most recent and extensive, containing information that could only have been gathered through intimate access to his life and business. More disturbing were the communications between Elizabeth and her associates. The tablet contained an encrypted messaging application that connected her to at least 5 other individuals, each apparently running similar operations against different targets. They shared techniques, information, and resources, operating as a coordinated network rather than isolated scammers. "This is far more sophisticated than most romance scams," Mercer commented as they reviewed the evidence. "They're not just after quick payouts. They're infiltrating their targets' lives completely, positioning themselves for maximum financial extraction over time." "Who are these people?" Will asked, scrolling through messages exchanged in a mixture of English and what appeared to be Eastern European languages. "Is this some kind of organized criminal enterprise?" "Based on what I'm seeing, yes," Mercer confirmed, "though not in the traditional sense. This appears to be a specialized network focused exclusively on high-value targets through romantic deception. They're patient, methodical, and extremely cautious." A message thread dated just 3 days earlier caught Will's attention. Elizabeth had written to someone identified only as coordinator. Phase 2 complete. Target completely trusting. Phase 3 timeline accelerated due to unexpected variables. Require additional personnel for extraction window. Estimate 2 to 3 weeks maximum. The response had been brief. "Approved. Team assigned. Stand by for confirmation." "What does this mean?" Will asked, though he already suspected the answer. "She's preparing to move to the final stage of her operation," Mercer explained, his expression grave. "Based on patterns in similar cases, extraction typically refers to the point where they transfer as many assets as possible to untraceable accounts, then disappear. The reference to additional personnel is concerning. It suggests she may be planning something more complex than simply draining accounts electronically." "She mentioned a property in the Berkshires last night," Will recalled. "Isolated, with a private helipad." Mercer nodded grimly. "Classic extraction setup. Get you to a remote location, complete the financial transfers and disappear via helicopter or private plane, while you're left dealing with the aftermath." "What about these unexpected variables?" Will asked. "Hard to say definitively, but given the timing." Mercer glanced toward the window that overlooked the garden. "My guess would be the discovery of the buried case. If she suspected you found it, she might have decided to accelerate her timeline rather than risk exposure." The implications were chilling. If Elizabeth believed her cover might be compromised, she could become desperate and potentially dangerous. Their examination of the tablet was interrupted by Sarah, who knocked urgently on the study door. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Elizabeth just called the house line. She said she forgot some documents for the charity board and is returning to pick them up. She'll be here in 20 minutes. We need to wrap this up now," Mercer said, quickly disconnecting his equipment from Elizabeth's laptop. "I've copied everything essential, but we need to leave everything exactly as we found it." Will helped Mercer restore Elizabeth's study to its original state, while Sarah kept watch at the front windows. The tablet was returned to Will's safe, and Mercer packed his equipment with practiced efficiency. "I'll analyze everything I've gathered and report back as soon as possible," Mercer promised as he prepared to leave. "Based on what we've found, I strongly recommend you accelerate your own timeline. She's moving toward endgame and you need to be ready." After Mercer departed through the service entrance, Will and Sarah barely had time to compose themselves before Elizabeth's car pulled into the driveway. Will met her at the door, maintaining his role as the unsuspecting husband. "That was quick," he remarked casually. "Forgot my presentation materials," Elizabeth explained, brushing past him toward her study. "The foundation board needs the donor projections for next quarter." Will followed at a discreet distance, watching as she entered her study and went directly to a drawer in her desk. She removed a leather portfolio, glanced around the room with a subtle scrutiny that might have gone unnoticed had Will not been looking for it, then turned to leave. "Everything in order?" Will asked. "Perfect," Elizabeth replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though I'm surprised to find you home, I thought you had meetings all day. Came back for lunch and to review some contracts," Will explained smoothly, heading back to the office shortly. Elizabeth studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "Don't work too hard, darling. You've seemed tense lately." "Just the pressure of the Westlake deal," Will assured her. "Nothing to worry about." After Elizabeth departed, Will retreated to his study and called Michael Bennett. "How did it go with Mercer?" the attorney asked without preamble. "Better than expected, but we had a close call. Elizabeth nearly caught us examining her devices." Will summarized what they had discovered on the tablet. "Michael, she's accelerating her timeline. The messages mentioned an extraction within 2 to 3 weeks. This changes our approach," Michael replied, his tone grim. "We need to secure your assets immediately, without alerting her. I've prepared emergency transfer authorizations that will move your primary holdings to new secure accounts that she doesn't know about. Can you come to my office this afternoon to sign them?" "I'll be there at 3, Will confirmed. When Will arrived at Michael's office, he found not only the attorney waiting for him, but also a team of financial forensic specialists and David Mercer, who had already begun analyzing the data gathered from Elizabeth's devices. "The situation is more complex than we initially thought," Michael informed Will as they gathered around a conference table. "Based on what Mercer found, Elizabeth and her associates have already compromised several of your accounts and business entities." "How?" Will demanded. "I've never shared my passwords or access information with her." "She didn't need them," Mercer explained. "Over the past 6 months, she's installed sophisticated keystroke loggers on your home computers, cloned your phone remotely, and even placed cameras in your home office to capture your login credentials visually." Will felt violated on a level he hadn't anticipated. His home, his private space, had been systematically compromised by the woman he had trusted most. "We've identified transfers totaling approximately $12 million already," Michael continued, sliding a document across the table. "Primarily through the shell companies involved in your home renovations, but also through more direct means. The good news is that this represents less than 5% of your total net worth. The better news is that we believe we can recover most of it through legal channels once we have Elizabeth in custody." "In custody," Will echoed. "The evidence Mercer found constitutes multiple federal crimes," Michael explained. "Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. These are serious charges that warrant FBI involvement. But," he held up a cautioning hand, "we need to be strategic about when and how we involve federal authorities. Move too soon, and Elizabeth's network will be alerted. They'll disappear, taking whatever they've already stolen with them." The team spent the next several hours executing a comprehensive protection plan. New accounts were established, assets transferred, security protocols updated, and monitoring systems put in place to track any unusual financial activity. By the time Will left Michael's office, his financial fortress had been rebuilt, with Elizabeth locked firmly outside its walls. The most difficult decision involved the timing of their counter-offensive. Michael advocated for immediate action, confronting Elizabeth with the evidence and bringing in law enforcement before she could implement her extraction plan. Mercer, however, urged a more calculated approach. "If we move now, we'll get Elizabeth, but her associates will vanish," the investigator argued. "Based on the communications I've reviewed, this network has been operating for years across multiple countries. Taking down just one operative leaves the organization intact to continue targeting others." "What do you suggest?" Will asked. "Use Elizabeth to catch the bigger fish," Mercer proposed. "Let her believe her plan is proceeding. Monitor her communications, track her movements, and when her associates make contact for the extraction, we'll be ready to catch them all." "That's risky," Michael objected. "Elizabeth will be alert to any changes in Will's behavior. If she suspects he knows the truth, there's no telling what she might do." "I can handle Elizabeth," Will said with quiet determination. "I've been playing along for days now. I can continue the charade a little longer, if it means putting an end to this entire operation." The decision made, Will returned home to find Elizabeth preparing an elaborate dinner. She greeted him with apparent affection, asking about his day and sharing anecdotes from her charity luncheon as though nothing were amiss. Will matched her performance, describing fictional business meetings while concealing his actual activities. "I've been thinking about what you said," Will mentioned casually over dinner, "about taking some time away. Perhaps we should look at those Berkshire's properties this weekend after all." Elizabeth's eyes lit up with what Will now recognized as calculated excitement. "Really? That would be wonderful. I've already shortlisted 3 that I think you'll love." "I trust your judgment," Will replied, raising his wineglass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Elizabeth echoed, her smile revealing nothing of her true intentions. Later that night, as Elizabeth slept beside him, Will lay awake, acutely aware of the dangerous game he was playing. The woman next to him was not just a con artist, but a member of a sophisticated criminal network, with resources and connections he was only beginning to understand. For the moment, his assets were secure, but his safety, and that of Sarah and Lily, remained at risk. The pieces were in motion now. Elizabeth was proceeding with her extraction plan, unaware that Will was setting a trap of his own. The coming days would determine not just the fate of his fortune, but potentially his life. As he finally drifted towards sleep, Will found himself thinking of Lily's innocent revelation in the garden, the small voice that had shattered the perfect illusion and set this dangerous confrontation in motion. In the darkness of the bedroom, Elizabeth's eyes opened slightly, watching Will's breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and typed a brief message. "Target secured. Berkshire's this weekend. Advance preparation required." The reply came seconds later. "Understood. Team on standby. Proceed with caution." Elizabeth deleted the exchange, returned the phone to the nightstand and closed her eyes, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. After months of careful planning, the final phase was about to begin. Soon, William Harrison's fortune would be hers, and she would vanish to emerge elsewhere with a new identity and new prey. Everything was proceeding according to plan, or so she believed. Friday morning dawned with an atmosphere of quiet tension at the Harrison estate. Will moved through his usual routine with mechanical precision. Breakfast with Elizabeth, a review of the morning financial news, preparation for the day ahead. Every interaction felt like a scene in an elaborate play, with both participants delivering carefully rehearsed lines while concealing their true intentions. "I've confirmed our appointments to view the Berkshire's properties tomorrow," Elizabeth announced over coffee. "The realtor can show us all 3 in one day if we leave early. I've taken the liberty of packing overnight bags for us. There's a lovely inn nearby where we can stay." "Sounds perfect," Will replied, noting how she had arranged everything to minimize his involvement and maximize her control over the situation. "I'll have James prepare the car." "Oh, I thought we might take my car instead," Elizabeth suggested casually. "The roads up there can be narrow and the SUV handles better on those winding mountain routes." Will recognized the strategy, her vehicle, her control. "Actually, I'd prefer James drive us. I have some work to review on the way, and you know how car-sick I get when trying to read as a passenger." A flicker of annoyance crossed Elizabeth's face before her pleasant mask returned. "Of course, darling. Whatever makes you comfortable." As Elizabeth left to make a phone call, Will sent a text to Mercer. "Berkshire's trip confirmed for tomorrow. She's arranged everything. including overnight stay, attempting to control transportation. Mercer's reply came seconds later. Expected team will be in position. Maintain normal routine today. Final briefing tonight. The day proceeded with excruciating normalcy. Will attended meetings at Harrison Capital, signed the Westlake acquisition contracts, and had lunch with business associates, all while maintaining regular communication with the team monitoring Elizabeth's activities. Through the surveillance now installed in their home, they confirmed that Elizabeth had made multiple calls to her associates, finalizing details for what she believed would be the culmination of her operation. By late afternoon, Will had returned home to find Elizabeth directing staff in preparations for their weekend trip. She moved through the house with the confident efficiency that had once impressed him, now recognizing it as the calculated precision of a predator. "I've arranged for Sarah and Lily to have the weekend off," Elizabeth informed him. "They're visiting Sarah's sister in Boston, so we won't need to worry about the cottage." Will maintained his neutral expression, despite the alarm this news triggered. "That's thoughtful of you. When did this get arranged?" "Just this morning," Elizabeth replied smoothly. "Sarah mentioned her sister has been unwell, so I suggested she take Lily for a visit. I've arranged a car service for them. They'll be leaving shortly." Will excused himself and immediately texted Sarah, "Do not leave the property. Stall for time. Say Lily isn't feeling well. Remain in cottage with doors locked. We'll explain later." Sarah's reply was immediate. "Understood." Already suspicious about sudden arrangement, Will keep Lily inside. The game was becoming increasingly dangerous. Elizabeth was clearly attempting to remove Sarah and Lily from the property, either to eliminate potential witnesses or, more worryingly, to use them as leverage. Either way, Will couldn't allow them to be placed in jeopardy. "Sarah just called," Will announced, returning to where Elizabeth was reviewing a property listing. "Apparently, Lily's running a fever. They'll have to postpone their trip to Boston." Elizabeth's expression tightened momentarily. "That's unfortunate. Perhaps they should see a doctor. I could drive them into town." "I've already suggested that," Will countered smoothly. "Sarah says it's probably just a 24-hour bug. She's giving Lily children's Tylenol and putting her to bed early." "Well, if you're sure they'll be all right on their own while we're away." Elizabeth let the sentence hang. "Sarah's very capable," Will assured her. "And Mrs. Peterson will be here if they need anything." Elizabeth nodded, though Will could see her mind recalculating behind her pleasant expression. The pieces on the board had shifted unexpectedly, and she was adapting her strategy accordingly. As evening approached, Will received a message from Mercer requesting a secure call. He excused himself to his study, ensuring the door was locked before dialing the investigator's number. "We've intercepted communications between Elizabeth and her team," Mercer informed him without preamble. 3 operatives are already in position near the Berkshires property she's selected as your primary destination. Based on their exchanges, they plan to execute the financial transfers tomorrow night at the inn, then extract Elizabeth via helicopter from the property's helipad early Sunday morning. "And me?" Will asked, though he already suspected the answer. "They've obtained a sedative," Mercer replied grimly. "The plan appears to be to drug you Saturday night, complete the transfers while you're incapacitated, then leave you to wake up Sunday with Elizabeth and a significant portion of your accessible wealth gone. How are we responding?" "We have a team of federal agents and local law enforcement preparing to intervene," Mercer explained. "They'll be in position at both the property and the inn, but will remain hidden until the associates arrive, and we have evidence of their criminal intent. Your role is simply to proceed as planned, allowing Elizabeth to believe her operation is proceeding normally. And Sarah and Lily? We're sending protective surveillance to the cottage now," Mercer assured him. "They'll be monitored continuously until this is resolved." After concluding the call, Will sat in silence for several minutes, mentally reviewing every aspect of the plan. Years of high-stakes business negotiations had prepared him for pressure, but this was different. This was personal, with potential dangers that extended beyond financial loss. A soft knock at his study door jolted him from his thoughts. "Will?" Elizabeth called. "Dinner's ready, darling." "Coming," he replied, composing himself before opening the door. Elizabeth had prepared his favorite meal, steak au poivre with roasted potatoes and asparagus, accompanied by an expensive bottle of Bordeaux. The dining room was lit with candles, the table set with their finest china and crystal. To an outside observer, it would have appeared to be a romantic dinner between a loving couple. To Will, it now seemed like a condemned man's last meal. "A toast," Elizabeth suggested, raising her wineglass, "to our weekend getaway. The first of many special moments to come." Will clinked his glass against hers, noting how she watched to ensure he drank. "The first of many," he echoed, sipping cautiously. Throughout dinner, Elizabeth was at her most charming, reminiscing about their courtship, asking about his future business plans and discussing potential vacation destinations for the coming year. The performance was flawless. If Will hadn't seen the evidence with his own eyes, he might still have been deceived by her apparent sincerity. "You seem pensive tonight," Elizabeth observed as they finished dessert. "Second thoughts about the Berkshires?" "Not at all," Will assured her. "Just thinking about how fortunate I am. Not every man finds someone who truly understands him." Elizabeth's smile was radiant. "We understand each other perfectly, Will. That's what makes us such an ideal match." After dinner, they retired to the library where Elizabeth suggested a nightcap. Will accepted a small bourbon, watching carefully as she poured it from the decanter. He noted how she positioned herself between him and the door, maintaining subtle control of the space, as she had always done, a detail he had previously interpreted as affection, but now recognized as tactical awareness. "Tomorrow will be a turning point for us," Elizabeth said, settling beside him on the sofa. "I can feel it." "So can I," Will agreed, his words carrying a double meaning she couldn't possibly miss if she knew the truth. Later, as they prepared for bed, Will noticed Elizabeth checking her phone frequently, exchanging brief texts with unseen correspondence. Her movements through their bedroom had a barely perceptible urgency, like an actor aware that the final act was approaching. "Sleep well, darling," Elizabeth murmured as she turned out the light. "Tomorrow is going to be a big day." In the darkness, Will lay awake, listening to Elizabeth's breathing as it gradually settled into the rhythm of sleep, or an impressive simulation of it. The woman beside him had spent months constructing an elaborate deception, integrating herself into every aspect of his life, while systematically preparing to destroy it. Tomorrow would indeed be a turning point, though not the one she anticipated. Saturday morning arrived with picture-perfect weather, clear blue skies and mild temperatures ideal for a countryside excursion. Elizabeth was up early, confirming their appointments with the realtor, and checking their packed bags with an attention to detail that would have seemed thoughtful just days earlier. Will contacted Mercer one final time before their departure, confirming that all elements of their counter-operation were in place. Sarah and Lily were secure in the cottage with protective surveillance. Federal agents were positioned at strategic locations in the Berkshires, and technical teams were monitoring all communications to and from Elizabeth's devices. "James is ready with the car, Mrs. Harrison," Mrs. Peterson announced as they prepared to leave. "He's loaded your overnight bags." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," Elizabeth replied. "We should return tomorrow evening, but I'll call if our plans change." Will noted the calculated ambiguity in her statement. She had no intention of returning, but maintained the appearance of normalcy until the very end. The drive to the Berkshires took just over 2 hours, with James at the wheel and Will and Elizabeth in the back seat. Will pretended to review documents, while actually monitoring Elizabeth's text communications through the surveillance software Mercer had installed. She was in frequent contact with her team, providing updates on their progress and estimated arrival times at each location. The first property they visited was a modern architectural masterpiece set on 20 acres of woodland, glass and steel perched on a hillside with panoramic views of the valley below. It was impressive, but lacked the privacy and helipad that Elizabeth's plan required. "It's stunning," she acknowledged as they toured the grounds with the realtor, "but perhaps not quite what we're looking for." The second property was a traditional New England estate, a colonial mansion with extensive grounds, a tennis court, and a small lake. Again, Elizabeth showed appropriate interest while identifying subtle deficiencies that would eliminate it from consideration. "Our final property for today is quite special," the realtor announced, as they approached a gated entrance set deep in the forest. 15 acres of complete privacy, a renovated historic main house guest cottage, and, as requested, a helipad that was installed by the previous owner, who was a helicopter enthusiast. As they drove up the winding driveway, Will observed Elizabeth's subtle shift in posture, a heightened alertness, a more focused attention to their surroundings. This was clearly the property she had selected as the stage for her extraction plan. The house itself was impressive, a sprawling stone structure with modern amenities discreetly integrated into its historic architecture. The realtor led them through room after room of tasteful luxury, highlighting features and discussing recent renovations. Throughout the tour, Elizabeth asked detailed questions about the property's isolation, the reliability of internet and cellular service, and the proximity of neighbors. "And the helipad?" she inquired as they concluded the interior tour. "Of course," the realtor replied. "It's just beyond the gardens with its own access road. Perfect for weekend commuting to the city." As they walked toward the helipad, Will noticed Elizabeth checking her phone, sending a brief text before returning her attention to the realtor's presentation. Through his surveillance access, he saw her message. "Primary location confirmed, ideal setup. Proceed with evening arrangements." The helipad itself was a simple concrete circle with appropriate markings and lighting, set in a clearing with sufficient space for safe landing and takeoff. Elizabeth surveyed it with professional assessment, asking about weight restrictions and local flight regulations with the casual interest of someone considering weekend transportation rather than a getaway vehicle. "I think this property has everything we're looking for," she announced, turning to Will with a perfectly calibrated expression of excitement. "Don't you agree, darling?" "It certainly checks all the boxes," Will replied neutrally, "though the price seems high for a weekend retreat." "We can discuss the financial details later," Elizabeth said, placing a hand on his arm. "Right now I'm just imagining our future here. Quiet weekends away from the city, entertaining friends, maybe even starting a family someday." The performance was masterful, the right blend of enthusiasm and future planning that would be expected from a loving wife, considering a significant purchase with her husband. Only Will knew that she had no intention of ever returning to this property after tomorrow morning. After concluding their tour and thanking the realtor, they proceeded to the inn where Elizabeth had reserved rooms for the night. The Maple Ridge Inn was a quintessential New England establishment, a historic building with wide porches, comfortable rooms, and a renowned restaurant featuring local ingredients. "I've arranged for dinner reservations at 7, Elizabeth informed him as they settled into their suite. "That gives us time to freshen up and perhaps enjoy a drink in the garden beforehand." Will agreed to the schedule, aware that every moment was now choreographed toward the culmination of Elizabeth's plan. As she unpacked their overnight bags, he noticed how she carefully placed a bottle of wine on the side table, undoubtedly containing the sedative Mercer had warned him about. "I think I'll take a shower before dinner," Will announced, stepping into the bathroom and locking the door. He immediately texted Mercer, "At the inn. She's prepared the wine for tonight. Expect her associates to make contact during or after dinner." Mercer's reply was immediate. "Understood. Agents in position throughout the property. Technical team monitoring all communications. Do not consume anything she prepares or handles directly." The evening unfolded like a carefully scripted drama. They enjoyed pre-dinner drinks in the inn's garden, with Elizabeth charming the staff and other guests with her perfect socialite persona. Throughout, Will noted her subtle surveillance of their surroundings, the casual way she identified exits and observed other patrons. It was the situational awareness of someone prepared for contingencies. Dinner was served in a private corner of the restaurant, with Elizabeth insisting on ordering for both of them, another control mechanism he now recognized. Throughout the meal, she maintained engaging conversation while surreptitiously checking her phone beneath the table. "Try the wine, darling," she suggested as their main course arrived. "It's a special vintage I asked them to prepare for us." Will raised the glass to his lips, but only pretended to drink, using conversation and careful maneuvering to conceal his abstention. "Excellent choice," he complimented, setting the glass down. By dessert, Will noticed Elizabeth growing incrementally more impatient as he showed no signs of sedation. Her glances at her watch became more frequent and her phone checks more obvious. "Is everything all right?" Will asked innocently. "You seem distracted." "Just tired from our day of property tours," she replied smoothly. "Perhaps we should return to our room for that bottle of champagne I packed, a private celebration of our find today." Back in their suite, Elizabeth moved with practiced efficiency, dimming the lights, putting on soft music, and uncorking the bottle she had placed earlier. Will watched her pour 2 glasses, noting how she subtly designated one specifically for him. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass. "To truth," Will countered, bringing the glass to his lips but not drinking. Elizabeth's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it briefly, then set it aside with forced casualness. "I need to freshen up," she announced. "Don't go anywhere." The moment she disappeared into the bathroom, Will examined her phone. The message was brief and clear. Team in position, ready when you are. Will returned the phone to its exact position and texted Mercer. They're moving now. She's expecting me to be sedated shortly. Within minutes, Elizabeth emerged from the bathroom, having changed into more practical clothing. Dark pants and a fitted top that would allow for easy movement. She checked Will's posture on the sofa, noting with satisfaction his deliberately slack expression and half-closed eyes. "Feeling tired, darling?" she asked, her tone solicitous while her eyes calculated. "Very," Will mumbled, slumping further into the cushions. "Don't feel right." "Just rest," Elizabeth soothed, placing a throw blanket over him. "I need to make a few calls about the property. Business details." As soon as she believed Will was sufficiently sedated, Elizabeth moved to the desk and opened her laptop. Will watched through barely open eyes as she accessed banking portals and began initiating transfers. She worked methodically, moving from one account to another, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. What Elizabeth didn't know was that each account she accessed had been secured by Will's team. The interfaces she saw were convincing simulations that recorded her actions while preventing any actual transfers. Every keystroke, every account number, every destination was being logged as evidence. After nearly 30 minutes of uninterrupted work, Elizabeth appeared satisfied. She closed the laptop and made a phone call, speaking in a low voice. "It's done. Everything's transferred according to plan. He's completely out, won't remember a thing. You can proceed with extraction preparations for 5 a.m. Ending the call, she approached Will, checking his pulse and breathing to confirm his unconscious state. Satisfied, she began gathering essential items and placing them in a small travel bag. Her real passport, not the Elizabeth Harrison identity, untraceable phones, and various other resources prepared for her escape. The quiet knock at the door came precisely as planned. Elizabeth checked Will once more before opening it to admit 2 men in nondescript clothing, the associates who had been positioned nearby to assist with the final phase of the operation. "Everything set?" the taller of the 2 asked, glancing toward Will's apparently unconscious form. "Perfectly," Elizabeth confirmed. "Transfers complete, extraction vehicle confirmed for 5 a.m. We just need to maintain the situation until then." "What about him?" the second man inquired, nodding toward Will. "The sedative will keep him under until well past noon tomorrow," Elizabeth explained. "By then we'll be halfway to our new identities, and the accounts will be emptied and closed." The choreography of their criminal conspiracy played out exactly as anticipated, except for one critical detail. As the 3 conspirators discussed the final details of their extraction plan, the door to the suite burst open. Federal agents swarmed into the room, weapons drawn, shouting commands that left no room for misinterpretation. "FBI, hands where we can see them. Do not move." The shock on Elizabeth's face was genuine, perhaps the first authentic expression Will had seen from her in their entire relationship. Her accomplices froze, then slowly raised their hands as agents secured them. Will stood from the sofa, all pretense of sedation gone. "It's over, Elizabeth, or whatever your real name is. What have you done?" she whispered, her perfect mask finally cracking to reveal the calculating criminal beneath. "I found the case in the garden," Will replied simply. "Lily saw you bury it. The truth was literally unearthed by a child's honesty, something you wouldn't understand." As the agents handcuffed Elizabeth and her associates, reading them their rights and cataloging evidence from the suite, Will stepped aside to speak with Mercer and the FBI case agent in charge of the operation. "We've already apprehended 2 more associates at the helipad location," the agent informed him. "Based on communications we've intercepted, this network has been operating across at least 6 countries. Your cooperation has given us the break we needed to dismantle their entire organization." "What happens now?" Will asked, watching as Elizabeth was led from the room, her composed facade finally shattered. "They'll face multiple federal charges, wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and more," the agent explained. "With the evidence we've gathered from your case and the connections to other victims, they're looking at significant prison sentences." As the operation concluded and statements were taken, Will found himself standing alone in the suite that had been intended as the final stage of Elizabeth's deception. The woman he had married, whose real name they would later discover was Natalia Petrovna, had never existed. Their entire relationship had been an elaborate fiction designed to separate him from his fortune. Yet in the end it was truth that had prevailed, not through sophisticated surveillance or financial forensics, but through the simple honesty of a child who saw something buried and spoke up about it. The following morning, Will returned to his estate in Greenwich, the beautiful prison that had housed his deception. Sarah and Lily met him at the door, their genuine concern a stark contrast to the calculated performance he had endured for months. "Is it over?" Sarah asked simply. "Yes," Will confirmed. "She won't be back. None of them will." Lily looked up at him with the uncomplicated directness of childhood. "Was Mrs. Elizabeth a bad person, Mr. Will?" Will crouched down to the child's level, finding the right words to explain a complex situation. "She wasn't who she pretended to be, Lily. And yes, she was doing bad things. But you helped stop her by telling the truth about what you saw in the garden. You were very brave." In the weeks that followed, the full scope of the operation was revealed. Elizabeth had been part of an international network that had defrauded wealthy individuals of millions of dollars through elaborate romantic deceptions. The evidence gathered from Will's case provided law enforcement with connections to victims across North America and Europe, leading to multiple arrests and the recovery of substantial assets. Will's own financial losses were minimal compared to what might have been. The early discovery of Elizabeth's true nature had prevented the execution of her final extraction plan. More significant was the emotional toll, the recognition that his judgment had been so thoroughly compromised by loneliness and the desire for connection. 3 months after Elizabeth's arrest, Will stood in his garden watching as landscapers removed the section where the case had been buried. In its place, they installed a small fountain, a symbol of transparency and renewal. Sarah approached, handing him a cup of coffee. "The new design looks wonderful," she commented, standing beside him to observe the transformation. "A fresh start," Will agreed. "No more secrets buried in my garden." "Lily wants to know if she can help choose the plants for the new beds," Sarah mentioned with a smile. "She has very specific opinions about which flowers should go where." "I would welcome her expertise," Will replied, returning the smile. "Her judgment has proven better than mine in matters of gardening." As they walked back toward the house, Will glanced at the guest cottage where Lily could be seen drawing at her small desk by the window. The child whose honesty had saved him from financial ruin continued to approach life with the straightforward clarity that adults so often lost. In the aftermath of betrayal, Will had found an unexpected truth. That authentic connection, whether with Sarah's professional loyalty, Lily's innocent honesty, or the genuine concern of friends like Michael Bennett, was worth more than all the perfect illusions money could buy. Where once a poisonous deception had been planted, truth now flowed like water in the garden of the Harrison estate. And Will, wiser now to the masks people wore, had learned to value transparency above perfection, a lesson buried in his garden, unearthed by the simple words of a child. "It's buried right here, Mr. Will."